Hi, this is Tiffany Coral. This is my EDL 850 Module 12, Copyright and the Computer Regulations Governing Technology. So first is Section 1, the case summary, some background information about the case. Mrs. Lynn, she is the librarian or media specialist at St. Regis School. She is also serving as the computer laboratory teacher. She is not being paid extra for this. This is something that she volunteered here to do to help the school district out. Um, she has no training on this that is detailed in this scenario. She ordered some new computer software for the computer lab. This was paid for by the school district and was approved by them. She then, after 4 months, coming to agreement with some of the other teachers in the school district, decided that they wanted to supplement that software into the classroom setting for individualized instruction. So she chose to order some blank CDs that was also paid through the school district to copy that program software for individual teachers. She then began to hand it out. A seasoned teacher at the district in third grade, Mrs. Williams, she was happy to accept that software. But when giving it to Mrs. Brandon, another third grade teacher, she's new to the district, but she served 3 years at another school district. She was concerned about the copyright violations that this copying of the software had and the implications that it could affect her in a way. So she did not accept it. She then went to the principal, Mr. Keith Sample. He's been the principal there for 3 years, and she addressed her concerns with him. Section 1, some other facts to consider. To start, the events, they occurred at St. Regis School. The school population is 420 students, and they serve grades K through 8. It is a rural community about 20 minutes from a city. Copyright violations. So Mrs. Lynn, she did make 4 different computer software copies illegally. So this was a copyright infringement for use in the classrooms during school hours at the school and the library. All the parties involved. So Mrs. Evans, she was also involved in this. She is the PTA president. She helped make these illegal copies, so she's also involved in the infringement. Mrs. William, she accepted the material, so she's part of the violation as well. Mrs. Brandon, she is part of the reason that the principal has knowledge of this copyright infringement because she did not accept the materials due to her previous school district's policy on copyright. And in return, she responded by addressing her issue with Mr. Sample, who then began to address the issue with Mrs. Lynn about the serious consequences of making copies illegally. Section 2, the reporting. The publishers or authors of the copyrighted content, they have been harmed by Mrs. Lynn's and Mrs. Evans making copies illegally. The school district has also been harmed because they are now liable for that copyright infringement, and the evidence was there when Mr. Sample went to visit Mrs. Lynn. So there's evidence of the copyright infringement and all the teachers that have the blank CDs that were copied the software onto. From the information that we were given, I see that there is no school board policy, or there's no knowledge of a school board policy on copyright. Professional development opportunities. There's no suggestion that there was ever professional development for the teachers at St. Regis on appropriate procedures for copying material. Next, copied content. So 4 different computer software programs were copied illegally. The number is of the illegal copies is not mentioned, but I know at least third grade received the copies, so that would be at least 8 copyright infringement violations. And Mr. Sample, he saw the evidence of the blank CDs when he confronted Mrs. Lynn and Miss Evans about their actions. Things also to consider, so the violations go with the 1976 U.S. Copyright Act and the 1980 Amendment. So the original software, it can be used legally in a school, but copies cannot be made and not be shared with other sources or other classrooms. So it was fine within the library, but then by dispersing them out into different classrooms, that made it a copyright infringement. Fair use versus infringement. Fair use of the materials, so that must stay in a single classroom. It cannot be shared amongst other staff, which is what Mrs. Lynn intended to do. And then making of a copy of a textbook and other sources that are too expensive for every student, that's also infringement. So that was the main reason that these copies were made, was because of the school's lack of um, budget to purchase more. So that makes it an infringement. And in this scenario, there appears to be no discrimination or harassment that is evident. Section 3, synthesize. Mrs. Lynn made copies of 4 different computer software programs to disperse to classroom teachers, therefore creating copyright infringement. Section 4, synthesize the facts. So the people involved in this scenario are Mrs. Lynn. She is the experienced librarian. She is the one who made copies involving the PTA president, Mrs. Evans. And when Mr. Sample came to her, firstly, she did not seem to be taking the copyright protocol seriously. To me, that shows that there is lack of school board policy and professional development on the consequences for not following copyright. Other teachers involved that we know of are Mrs. Williams, who accepted the copies, Mrs. Brandon, who did not, and the principal, Mr. Sample, who is addressing the copyright infringement. All of these scenarios and all the actions took place in the school building at St. Regis, specifically the library where the copies were made, as well as classrooms where they were dispersed, and Mr. Sample's office where Mrs. Brandon addressed her concerns. Programs, the school, it is a rural public school that we know of. It teaches students from grades kindergarten through 8th. The population is a small 420, and we do know that the school has limited funding. They do 2 fundraisers, one in the fall and one in the spring, to help supplement the teachers' small budgets that they get for their classrooms. Section 5, to review and prioritize. This is a damaging situation. This can affect the reputation and credibility of the school district if this copyright infringement is not taken care of. The school district and school board would appear to have their reputation damaged. Mr. Sample, if he does not address this situation in a timely fashion, it could also affect him. Mrs. Linda, Mrs. Evans, they could definitely be sued for their part in the copying of the computer programs. Relevant stakeholders, again, the school district, Mrs. Lynn, Mrs. Sample, Mr. Sample, Mrs. Williams, the PTA president, Mrs. Evans, are some of the major contributors there. The publisher of the contract, they have not been notified, but they are a relevant stakeholder in this case, as well as the superintendent and the school board, which have not been notified at this time. The outcome or the effects, this could affect the school district. This can affect Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Evans' current position. Current and future students, they could be affected based on termination or what happens to these teachers involved in this scenario, as well as the families of the current students. Is Mrs. Lynn a member of the union? If she is, that affects the school union as well. Professional development and copyright board policy all could be affected or outcomes of this scenario. Section 5 is to review and prioritize. So again, these are some unanswered questions. What professional development did employees receive, if they received any on copyright? Did Mrs. Lynn provide other copyrighted material. So is this the first time that this has happened, or has it happened in the past and the teachers were unaware that it was an infringement and it's just coming to light because of Miss Brandon's prior professional development and school board policy at her other school district? What policy does St. Regis have, if they have a policy? What other documentation does Mrs. Sample have, as well as is Miss Lynn a union member? So if she would be involved in a court case, the union would then back her and help her if she was a union member. Um, and more information can be learned about this situation. So those are some of the questions that are unanswered, but I believe that there is enough evidence to provide a clear and firm decision on this case. Section 6 is the available options. No action can be taken. That is action 1. So this could lead to potential court proceedings along with media coverage. If the publisher of the material gained knowledge of this, they could in fact sue. Action 2 would be to terminate Miss Lynn and Miss Evans for their actions, as well as contacting the publisher of the material. This could lead to letting go of 2 adequate teachers without the proper knowledge, while the school district and other teachers could face legal proceedings based on this copyright infringement. Action 3 is to again terminate Mrs. Lynn and Miss Evans for their copyright infringement. This would be again letting go 2 adequate teachers that were not given the appropriate professional development on copyright. Action 4 would be beginning the process of creating a detailed copyright policy at St. Regis, while putting Mrs. Lynn on an improvement plan or probationary period for the rest of the school year because of her actions. This would involve school board meetings and approvals, and Mrs. Lynn could gain a negative attitude based on this probationary period. Some additional options. Action 5 would be to begin again the process of creating a detailed school board policy and scheduling professional development for all the staff to complete on copyright. This again would involve school board meetings and approvals. Mrs. Lynn, along with the other teachers, would gain a positive outlook and knowledge on copyright infringement and fair use. It would also protect the school district from further liability. Action 6 would be to discuss with Mrs. Lynn individually any other copyright infringement that has occurred and eliminate it all. Continue by beginning the process of creating the school board policy and professional development for all staff to receive on copyright. This would again involve school board meetings and approval. Mrs. Lynn and all the other teachers would gain knowledge on copyright infringement and fair use. It would protect the school district, and it would eliminate any further infringement that may have occurred in the past that was the school did not know about. Section 7 is to evaluate options. So this is the pros and cons. So taking no action, this would be the easiest action at the time for Mr. Sample, but in the long run, it can lead to a negative reputation. It could leave the school liable, and even disciplinary action for the principal, Miss Lynn and Mrs. Evans in the long run. Option 2 is a liberal action. This meets the needs of eliminating the problem employees that we are aware of in this situation, but it does not fix the current school board policy or the lacking professional development, and it really doesn't give Mrs. Lynn and Miss Evans a fair trial in this case. We don't think that they have knowledge of proper copyright, and the school district still could face lawsuits. Option 3 is termination. So this eliminates the employees involved again, but it does not fix any of the board policy or professional development. Option 4 is an improvement plan. So this is the probationary period. Mrs. Lynn and Miss Evans, they would get to keep their current positions along with an adequate board policy, but it does not correct the professional development or lack thereof. Option 5 is adding the professional development, so you would have adequate board policy as well as professional development for the staff. This can be a long process of meetings to correct both policy and professional development for approval. And a last option would be option 6,